The first time I realized how much I depended on light was the night the storm took it away. The forecast kept using words like severe and localized outages. But that language doesn't prepare you for the moment your living room goes from familiar to foreign in a single blink. 1 second the TV was mumbling and the kitchen clock was glowing green. The next second it was pure black, like someone had thrown a heavy blanket over my head. Outside rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded like handfuls of gravel, and every thunderclap made the windows flex. My phone lit up with 1 bar of service and a dozen neighborhood alerts. Power out in multiple areas. Drive carefully. Report downed lines. I told myself it was fine. I had candles. I had a flashlight. I had a lock on the front door, and a deadbolt I always checked twice. Still, the quiet between the thunder hits felt wrong, like the house was holding its breath. I grabbed the flashlight from the junk drawer, the one I kept meaning to replace, and clicked it on. The beam was thin and slightly yellow, but it was something. I swept it across the room, and the furniture reappeared in pieces. The arm of the couch, the corner of the coffee table, the framed photo on the wall catching a dull glare. That's when I heard it, 3 soft taps, not on a window, not on the door, but from somewhere inside the house, deeper than the living room. At first I blamed the storm. Houses creak, pipes thump. But these taps had a rhythm, like fingers testing a surface. Tap, tap, pose, tap. My stomach tightened. I stood there, holding my breath, listening. Rain, distant thunder, and then the faintest scrape like a shoe sole on hard wood. I live alone, but the layout of my place is simple. Living room, a short hallway, 2 bedrooms, bathroom at the end. Normally that hallway is nothing. In the dark it became a tunnel. The flashlight beam didn't fill it. It just carved a narrow slice through it, leaving the corners intact, thick with shadow. I called out, trying to make my voice sound annoyed instead of terrified. Hello. If someone's there, I'm calling the police. My own words seemed to get swallowed. Nothing answered. Another scraped closer, this time like someone shifting their weight. I told myself there was an explanation. Maybe the back door had blown open. Maybe a neighbor needed help. Maybe I was hearing the rain through the attic vents. Then lightning flashed, and for the briefest instant the hallway was lit in cold white. In that instant, I saw something that the flashlight hadn't shown me: the closet door halfway open, when I always keep it shut. The beam snapped to it. My hand was shaking so badly the light jittered. The closet was empty, coats hanging, shoes lined up, nothing else. I exhaled too fast, almost laughing at myself, and that's when the sound came again, this time unmistakably, a footstep, heel to toe in the hallway. Not upstairs. Not outside. In my hallway, I backed up until my calves hit the couch. The flashlight felt suddenly small, like a toy. I aimed it down the hall and held it steady, forcing myself not to blink. "Hey," I said louder. "I have a gun." I did not. I had a flashlight and a phone that was already dropping to no service. Silence. Long enough that my brain tried to patch over the fear with denial. Then, from the end of the hall, a whisper of fabric, like someone brushing past a wall. I clicked the flashlight off and on again, like the beam might sharpen if I gave it another chance. The second it came back, the hallway filled with light, and at the far end, half a step into the circle of illumination, a man was standing there. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't hiding his face. He was just waiting, as if he'd been standing in the dark for minutes, watching me try to convince myself I was alone. The beam hit his skin, and he squinted, then smiled, slow and wrong, like my fear was a private joke. He wore a dark hoodie soaked at the shoulders, but his shoes were dry. That detail hit me like a slap. Dry shoes inside my house during a storm meant he hadn't just come in through an open door. He'd been in here before the power went out. I couldn't move. My body locked up, every muscle tight, and all I could hear was my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. His head tilted and he took a step forward, staying right at the edge of the beam so his face kept slipping in and out of shadow. I finally found my voice again. "Get out," I said. It came out thin. "Get out right now." He didn't. He lifted one hand palm up like he was showing me something, and for a second I thought it was empty. Then the lightning flashed again, and metal winked in his fingers, a crowbar, short and heavy. Another thunderclap swallowed my gasp. He moved a little closer. The smell of wet fabric and something sour reached me, as if the darkness carried it. I did the only thing my brain could manage. I threw the flashlight at him. It hit his chest and clattered to the floor, spinning the beam sweeping crazily across the walls, like a searchlight. In that spinning light, his smile vanished. His eyes went flat. He lunged. I ran. Not toward the front door. My body chose the kitchen because I knew the floor plan by memory. I slammed into the counter, grabbed the largest knife I could find, and turned. The flashlight on the floor was still rolling, stuttering the hallway with light and dark. In each pulse, he was closer. In each pulse, the crowbar rose a little higher. My phone was in my pocket. I yanked it out, hit emergency, and prayed it would connect. The screen showed the spinning circle, the cruel delay, and then finally a single ringing tone. Somewhere behind me, the back door rattled, not from the wind, but from a deliberate hand testing the handle. I realized with icy clarity that he wasn't alone, or he was making sure I knew he could leave and come back whenever he wanted. 911. What's your emergency? The operator said, her voice. Suddenly, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I'm in a blackout, I blurted. Someone's in my house. Please, send someone. Another lightning flash lit the kitchen window, and for a split second, I saw my own reflection. Wide eyes, knife shaking, and behind my reflection in the dark glass, the outline of the man in the hallway, perfectly still again watching me. Talk like he was listening to the dispatcher too. The operator was asking for my address. I tried to answer, but my tongue felt thick. The man took one slow step into the kitchen doorway. Careful, controlled, almost polite, and I understood the worst part: he didn't need to rush. The lights were out. The storm was loud. The neighborhood was blind, and I had just thrown my only flashlight away. The dispatcher told me to get to a locked room if I could, to keep the line open, to stay quiet. I was whispering my address when he lifted the crowbar and lightly tapped it against the doorway. Once, twice, like he was copying the taps I'd heard earlier. That tiny sound cut through the rain better than any scream. I backed into the pantry and pulled the door almost closed, leaving a crack. My phone screen dimmed with a low battery warning, and I couldn't decide which fear was worse, the call dropping or the beam of that spinning flashlight finally landing on my hiding place. From the crack, I saw him step into the kitchen, head tilted, listening. Then he smiled at the dark, like he could see me anyway, and started walking, closer to me. I found out later the power didn't go out in my house that night. It was taken, and the way I figured it out still makes my hands sweat whenever a storm rolls in. The blackout hit around 1130, right after a thunderclap so loud it made my smoke detector chirp. Every lamp died at once. The ceiling fan coasted to a stop, and the house went quiet, in that unplugged way that makes you hear your own pulse. I did the checklist because routine feels like control, phone, candle, flashlight, locks. Then I glanced through the front blinds, and my stomach dropped. Across the street, my neighbor's porch light was still on. 2 houses down, a warm window glow. The street wasn't fully out. My house was. That's when fear stopped being weather and turned into intent. I told myself it had to be my breaker. It happens. Old punhead. One house trips while others don't. The rational explanation arrived. Fast because I needed it. My breaker box is outside on the side of the house, behind a gate, and I'd put a padlock on it after reading about criminals killing power to disable alarms. I remember being proud of that lock. I grabbed my flashlight, kept the beam low, and eased out the back door into the narrow passage between my wall and the fence. Rain hissed against the siding, and the air smelled like wet wood and mud. I swung the beam toward the gate and froze. The latch was open. I always latch it. Always. I forced myself forward, one slow step at a time, because part of me still believed I'd find a normal problem with a normal solution. The breaker box door was hanging open a few inches, like a mouth. The padlock wasn't on the hasp. It was dangling from the hinge unlocked, swinging slightly as if it had been touched seconds ago. My fingers went numb. I leaned in and saw the main switch pushed down. Not tripped pushed. I reached for it and felt warmth in the plastic, the kind of warmth you only get from skin contact. A sound came from inside the house. Upstairs, one careful footstep, then a pause. Not outside with me. Inside. I flipped the main up anyway. Nothing. No porch light. No her. No reassuring click of anything waking. Just darkness and rain. I aimed the flashlight at the feed line, where it entered the box, and saw a shallow slice in the insulation, just enough to expose bright metal underneath. A blade mark. Not an animal. Not storm damage. Sabotage. I backed away, and my heel sank into mud. When I lifted it, my beam caught a fresh boot print beside mine, angled toward the breaker box. Clean edges. Recent. Whoever made it was close, or had been close, moments ago. Then, another sound, downstairs this time, came from right behind the back door, a soft creak of hard wood, like someone had stepped near the kitchen threshold and stopped. I lunged for the door, yanked it shut, and threw the deadbolt. My hands shook so badly I had to twist it twice to be sure it caught. Immediately, something bumped gently on the other side of the door. Not wind, not a branch pressure, like a shoulder leaning in to listen. I backed into the kitchen, flashlight trained on the door, and heard movement upstairs again. A quiet slide like a bedroom door, opening slowly to keep the hinges from squealing. Then the faint pull of a drawer. They weren't searching frantically. They were going to specific places, as if they knew the house. I tried calling 911. One bar then, no service. I pressed the phone to the window, tried again. It spun then failed. Across the street, my neighbor's porch light still glowed like an insult. I wanted to scream for them, but the storm was loud and I could hear something louder inside my head. The deliberate scrape of a chair, leg dragging across hardwood in the living room. Slow, controlled, not panic. Someone was moving furniture while I was outside at the breaker box. Barricading. I edged toward the hallway, aiming the flashlight down the dark tunnel, trying to keep walls behind me. The beam found the living room entrance, and I saw the chair wedged at an angle near the hall, mouth positioned to catch a door or slow a run. My throat went dry. Then the flashlight jetted in my hands, and in the edge of the beam I saw a shape flatten against the hallway corner shoulder sleeve. The curve of a head, staying just outside the light. The way someone practiced stays outside a camera frame. I snapped the beam toward it. The corner was empty. The house looked normal again, which is how the dark makes you feel insane. From the stairs, a second sound answered, fabric shifting near the landing, like someone leaning back from the railing to keep their face hidden. 2 positions. 2 presences. I took one step backward, and that's when a voice spoke from my living room, calm and close, as if it had been there the whole time. "You locked the wrong door," it said. I swung the flashlight hard behind the couch, and the beam caught him, crouched low, eyes reflecting, white mouth pulled into a patient smile. His hoodie shoulders were damp, but his hair was dry. His shoes were clean. He lifted one hand, slowly, not to threaten, just to show me something small and metallic that winked in the beam my padlock key, the one that should have been on my keyring. Over his shoulder, at the top of the stairs, a second silhouette stood perfectly still, watching. In that moment I understood the plan with icy clarity. The blackout wasn't an accident, it was a net, and the storm was just the noise they used to pull it tight. He didn't rush. He stayed low behind the couch, like the dark belonged to him, while the silhouette on the stairs held, still proof I wasn't dealing with one person. My phone flashed a low battery warning, and the blue glow on my hands felt like a flare, so I killed the screen and backed toward the kitchen with the flashlight up, trying not to step on anything that would squeal. The man didn't follow right away. I heard the padlock key jingle once, deliberate like a laugh. I slipped into the pantry and pulled the door almost closed, leaving a crack to watch the hallway. Through that crack I saw the chair barricade shift a fraction, and then a slow heel-to-toe footstep crossed the living room. I tried 911 again. One bar flickered up, the call rang once, and then it dropped. The flashlight beam trembled on the pantry shelves, turning labels into pale masks, and I realized he was giving me just enough quiet to hear my own fear to measure how long I'd stay hidden yet. The footstep paused, and a calm voice answered from the dark. "It won't work," he said softly. "Not tonight." Then 3 taps landed on the pantry door, perfectly spaced. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The same rhythm I'd heard earlier, now inches from my face, through a sheet of wood. "You see how easy this is?" he asked. "I turn the house off and you walk where I want." He didn't force the door. The taps moved away, and somewhere on the stairs, the second presence shifted wood, creaking once. I stayed locked in that pantry until distant sirens finally threaded through the storm and real flashlights washed the walls. The officers found no forced entry, no broken glass, no one hiding. Just my breaker box outside, hanging open the padlock, swinging from the hinge in a shallow cut in the feed line that looked too clean to be weather. One officer asked if I was missing a key. I looked at my ring and felt sick all over again. The padlock key was gone, and the metal ring had a fresh scratch where it had been slid off and back on with practiced fingers. The lightning is the cruelest kind of flashlight because it shows you just enough to ruin you and then it takes the picture away. By the time the power died that night, the storm had already been bullying the neighborhood for hours, pushing rain sideways and slamming tree limbs against roofs like it was trying to get inside. I had just enough time to set candles on a plate and put my phone on the counter to charge before everything blinked once and vanished. The refrigerator fell silent. The little hum that tells you a home is alive just stopped. It was so dark I couldn't even see my hands until another bolt flashed and painted the living room in harsh white for half a heartbeat. In that frozen instant I saw the layout like a photograph, the couch, the hallway, mouth, the front door, and the thin chain lock hanging loose because I never use it. Then, black again. I told myself the locks were enough, and then I heard a sound that did not belong to the storm. A soft, deliberate click, like metal on metal, coming from the front porch. Someone was testing the doorknob. Click, pose, click. I didn't want to turn on my phone light because it would turn me into a glowing target. I didn't want to shout because it would confirm I was alone. I just stood there listening until the doorknob stopped. Lightning flashed again and the front door window flared bright, and in that light I saw the shadow of a head on the frosted glass, close enough that the person had to be standing right against the door. Darkness swallowed it immediately. I backed up and grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen, the kind meant for camping, and clicked it on. The beam was strong, but my hand wasn't. I swept it across the room and pinned it on the front door. Nothing moved. I stepped closer, keeping the light on the knob and lock close enough to see the chain plate screws when the lightning flashed again. In that single burst of light, the world sharpened, and for one frame of reality, I saw a face pressed against the narrow sidelight window beside the door. Not a reflection, a feature. White and wet features flattened slightly from the pressure, eyes wide open and looking straight in. The flash ended and the face vanished into black, so completely it felt like my brain had invented it. I snapped the flashlight toward the window, but my beam was too narrow and the glass was dark. Nothing showed except my own pale hand gripping the flashlight. Then from the other side of the door, a voice spoke soft and calm, almost friendly. "Hey, it's okay. It's the power company." It was such a ridiculous sentence that for half a second my mind tried to accept it. Then reality hit. No utility worker knocks on a private home in a violent storm after the grid goes down and says it like that. I didn't answer. Lightning flashed again, and this time the face was closer angled as if the person was trying to find the exact line of sight into the living room. I saw the curve of a smile. I saw teeth. Then the door handle rattled hard, no longer patient. It shook, like someone was trying to break the internal parts loose. I ran for my phone, snatched it up, and the moment the screen lit the kitchen in cold blue, I hated it. No service. One bar. No service. Behind me, the front door shuddered again. I suddenly thought about that chain lock and felt sick, because you have to open the door to set it, and I had never bothered. I backed into the hallway, phone in one hand, flashlight in the other, aiming the beam at the front door like I could pin it shut with light. Another lightning flash exploded, and the face was gone. In its place in that sidelight window, I saw a hand, fingers splayed, pressing a thin object against the glass, like a card meant to slip between door and frame. The flash ended, and in the darkness I heard the sound that made my stomach drop. The faint sliding rasp of metal on metal right at the latch. He wasn't just shaking the knob anymore. He knew what he was doing. The thin object slid again faster, and the latch gave a tiny tick, like a tooth clicking into place. Not open, but closer than it should have been. My flashlight beam caught the deadbolt knob, and I stared at it the way you stare at a timer on a bomb. Through the rain, I heard his breathing right against the glass. Then, he changed tactics. The knob stopped moving, and a low grinding started metal biting wood as he pried at the frame to spread it just enough to slip the bolt. Lightning flashed, and I saw his hand again, knuckles white. The flash died, and the grinding continued, patient, methodical. My call finally connected, and I didn't even wait for the operator to finish speaking. I blurted my address, and the words "someone is breaking in," and she told me to get to a room, lock the door, and stay on the line. I did not want to turn my back on the front door, but the scraping grew more confident, more precise, and my body made the decision my pride couldn't. I ran deeper into the house. I ducked into the bathroom at the end of the hallway, unlocked the door, then slid down against it, knees to chest, flashlight pointed at the crack beneath the door, like I was waiting for feet. In the bathroom I could hear him. By sound alone, a soft scuff, then stillness, then another scuff, like he only stepped when thunder covered him. The operator told me to stay quiet, and I realized my flashlight beam was spilling under the door like a pointer. I clicked it off. Without light, every small noise became huge. The drip of the faucet, the rain and the gutters, until a new sound joined them. A slow scrape on the door as if a fingernail or something sharper was being dragged down the wood, just to feel how thin it was. Then a gentle tap on the handle, like a reminder that he knew exactly where I was. The operator kept me whispering alone, "Any weapons, can I hear him?" And I answered, with my throat tight and dry. Outside the bathroom, the house was silent again, and that silence was worse than the noise. Silence meant listening. Silence meant he could hear her voice through my phone. Then lightning filled the bathroom with stark white, and in that flash I saw the doorknob on my side turning just slightly, as if someone in the hallway was testing it with careful fingers. Darkness returned. The knob stopped. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The operator said, "Stay quiet. Officers are close." And then in the darkness right outside my door, a voice whispered close enough that it felt like lips against the wood. I can see when it flashes. My stomach dropped, because suddenly it made sense. He didn't need the lights. He was using the lightning like a camera shutter, taking little pictures of my fear. Another flash came, and through the crack under the door I saw the shadow of shoes inches from the threshold. The shoes were dry, then it went black again, and the shoes stayed there unmoving like he had all the time in the world. When the police finally arrived, their flashlights swept the rooms and their radios crackled, and they found nothing. No person, no footprints, just shallow scratches around my lock like someone had started and stopped on purpose. Later, when the power came back, and every room looked normal again, I noticed a single wet smear on the sidelight window beside the front door, right where the face had been. And inside that smear, faint as a fingerprint, was the outline of teeth. I used to think a blackout was an accident, something that happened to you. Then one night my house went dark, and a second later I heard the breaker switch click from the outside wall like someone's hand had done it on purpose. It was close to midnight. Rain fell hard enough to drown out small sounds, and thunder rolled just often enough to keep my nerves tight. I was in bed when the lamp blinked and died. The fan shut off, and silence poured in. At first I didn't panic, until I looked through the curtains and saw my neighbor's porch light still glowing. The house next to mine was lit too. My house alone was black. Before I could explain it away, I heard it, the faint, unmistakable plastic click of a breaker handle snapping down, coming from the side of my house, where the main panel sits in a metal box. Storms don't click breakers. People do. I turned on my phone flashlight and moved through the house, checking locks with shaking hands. Everything inside looked normal, which meant the problem was outside where I couldn't see it. I found my big mag light, and a set of keys, because the outside breaker box has a small lock. The box is on the side of the house, in a narrow passage between my wall and the fence. I cracked the back door and stepped out. Rain hit my face like needles. The flashlight beam made the drops look like bright insects. I pulled the door shut behind me out of habit, then tested the knob and felt my stomach drop. Locked. My keys were in my pocket, but the door between me and safety suddenly felt like a trapdoor that had snapped shut. I walked toward the breaker box, the beam sweeping the ground. The passage was tight, my shoulders almost brushing the fence. Halfway down the light caught a boot print in the wet mud, deep and clean. Not mine. Thunder rolled, and underneath it I heard another noise layered into the rain breathing. Not my breathing. Slow, steady, close. I aimed the flashlight at the breaker box. The metal door was open. The padlock was hanging from the latch unlocked, swinging slightly as if someone had just let go. My keys felt suddenly pointless. I took one step forward, and the breathing stopped. Then behind me the fence creaked, the faintest shift of weight on wood. I whipped the flashlight around and the beam hit only wet planks and ivy. No person, no shadow, just darkness holding its corners. And then right beside my ear, close enough that I felt warm air, a voice whispered, "Go ahead." Turn it back on. I jerked so hard, I almost dropped the flashlight. The voice was inside the passage with me. Someone was standing close just out of the beam, using the narrow space to hide. Part of me wanted to run, but another part thought, if I can get the power back on, the porch light will flood this space, and I'll see him. I reached toward the panel with my left hand, and kept the flashlight in my right, angled down. My fingers touched the cold plastic of the main switch, and the storm gave me the worst gift. Lightning flashed bright as a camera flash, and for that instant the whole passage lit up. In that instant, I saw him, a man pressed flat against the fence behind me. Hoodie up, face turned toward my back, eyes locked on my hands at the breaker. He wasn't hiding because he was afraid. He was hiding because he wanted to be close. The flash died, and he disappeared again, but I had the picture now. I couldn't unsee it. I yanked my hand back and spun, raising the maglite like a club. "Get back," I shouted, and my voice sounded thin against the rain. He didn't answer. I heard movement, fast shoes on wet concrete, a shoulder brushing the fence fabric scraping by. And then I heard the back door handle jiggling behind me. For a second my brain stalled. Then it clicked into place. The breaker box wasn't just to kill the lights. It was to pull me out here into this narrow space while someone else worked the house. Then the breaker clicked again, loud and crisp, and my entire house flashed to life for a fraction of a second. Porch light, hallway light, the glow of my living room lamp, just long enough for whoever was at my back door to see exactly where everything was. And then it went dead again. He was toggling it not to fix anything, but to control the light, the way a kid plays with a switch. From the darkness near the door, I heard a low chuckle, barely audible under the rain, and the voice by my ear murmured, "See, works fine." My brain finally stopped trying to solve the problem, and focused on one thing: get out of this passage. I ran, but the narrow space made every movement clumsy. The fence grabbed at my sleeves. The flashlight beam bounced, and turned the puddles into moving black holes. At the back door, the jiggling became a hard shove, then another. The frame groaned. Somewhere inside, something fell with a dull thump, like a picture frame knocked off a wall. I screamed again, not words, just sound, because I wanted the whole street to know. I tried my key on the back door anyway, fingers shaking so badly I missed the lock twice. The key went in on the third try, turned, and the deadbolt clicked, but the knob wouldn't budge. Then I realized why. A pressure on the other side. Someone was leaning into it, holding the door shut from inside the threshold. I stumbled backward and nearly fell, and in that moment the man in the passage moved. I didn't see him, but I felt the rush of air as he closed the distance, and I heard the wet slap of his shoes on concrete. I swung the maglite blindly and hit the fence instead, sending pain up my arm. He laughed again, closer now. Lightning flashed, and I saw his hand reach for my wrist, fingers spread like he already owned it. I twisted away and ran toward the yard, toward the open space, toward anything that wasn't that tight corridor. I fumbled my phone and hit emergency call. 1 bar. 2. Then the signal dropped to nothing. The back door rattled again. The lock held, but the sound of someone testing it felt like teeth on bone. I ran toward the yard end of the passage because I didn't want to be pinned between the fence and my own locked door. My shoulder clipped the boards. Splinters bit my skin. Something grabbed the back of my hoodie and yanked me hard enough that my feet slid. I spun and swung the maglite with everything I had. It connected with something solid. A grunt. The grip loosened. I burst out of the passage into the open yard, and the reins suddenly felt like freedom, because at least there was space to move. Lightning flashed again, and for a split second I saw a second figure at my back door close to the knob, hands working at it. When the flash ended, he vanished into the dark like he had never existed. I screamed for my neighbor, until lights snapped on across the street, and a voice shouted back, angry and confused. That was what finally made them retreat. Not morality. Fear of witnesses. By the time the police arrived, the breaker box was closed and locked again, as if the night had cleaned up after itself. They didn't find anyone. When I flipped the main switch back on from inside, the sudden brightness made me feel sick instead of safe, because I could finally see the thin smear of grease on the breaker handle, like it had been switched with a gloved hand. And on the inside of the metal door, scratched into the paint, where only someone standing in that passage would see it, were 4 words, messy and deep. Turn it off. Again. The power went out, and the first thing I heard wasn't thunder or wind, it was a footstep directly above my head. One heavy, careful step on the living room floor, followed by a pause, like whoever it was had stopped to listen for my reaction. I froze in the kitchen with my phone in my hand, staring at the dead microwave display, trying to convince myself it was the house settling. But the second step came heel to toe, unhurried, and I felt my stomach drop because I was alone. The storm had been building all evening, the kind of thick, humid weather that makes the air feel alive, and when the lights finally died, it happened with a clean snap that felt too precise. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam made a narrow tunnel through my kitchen, and everything outside that tunnel became a threat. I stood there and listened again, forcing myself to count the sounds, rain on the roof, a distant rumble, my own breathing. Then another step upstairs, closer to the hallway. Not a creak, not a pop, a step. I did the stupid thing people do in horror stories, because denial is faster than logic. I told myself the power outage must have tripped the breaker and I needed to reset it. Our panel is in the basement, down a set of narrow wooden stairs behind a door off the kitchen. I hated that basement in daylight. In a blackout, it felt like a mouth. I held the flashlight like a weapon and eased the basement door open. The air that rose up smelled like damp concrete and old cardboard. The stairs disappeared into black until my beam found them one at a time, and each step down felt like surrender. Halfway down, I heard something upstairs. Again, softer now, like someone's sock sliding on hardwood. The sound moved away from the kitchen and toward the living room, like whoever it was had heard the basement door open and decided to reposition. I stopped on the stairs with my fingers white around the rail, and in the silence between thunderclaps I could hear my own heartbeat. I wanted to run back up, lock myself in a room, call for help, but my phone signal was already weak from the storm, and the rational part of me said, get the lights back on. Light equals control. I kept going. The basement floor was cold through my socks. The flashlight beam found the breaker panel on the far wall, a grey metal box with a little latch. I flipped it open and stared at the rows of switches. Everything looked normal. Nothing tripped. That was the second time my stomach dropped, because if nothing tripped, then the outage wasn't just my house. It was the whole street, which meant I couldn't fix it. And which meant I had just walked into my basement for no reason, leaving the rest of my house behind me. I stood there with the panel open, listening. Above me, another footstep, this time directly over the basement stairs, like someone had moved to the kitchen and was standing on the spot where the floorboards were thinnest. The sound came with a faint creak, and then a pause. It felt like he was listening to me the way I was listening to him. I backed away from the panel, slowly keeping the flashlight angled up toward the underside of the stairs as if a face might appear between the steps. I took one step, then another, careful not to make noise, and that's when the basement door at the top of the stairs moved. Not slammed, not yanked, just a gentle shift, like someone's hand had found the edge and was slowly pulling it inward. The beam caught the bottom of the door, and I saw a slice of darker darkness widen as the door closed. I moved faster than boots on concrete steps, and the door continued closing with the calm patience of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I hit the bottom stair and started up flashlight, shaking now, and before I reached the halfway point, the basement door clicked shut. The sound wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was final. I lunged up the rest of the stairs and shoved my shoulder into the door. It didn't budge. I reached for the knob and turned it hard. Locked. I just stood there for a second with my hand on the knob, trying to process the fact that I had been shut into my own basement from the outside. I pounded once, then twice, and the wood absorbed the impact like it was a pillow. Above the door on the other side, the house was quiet. No running, no panic, no hurried retreat. Whoever locked me in did it the way you close a book. I pulled my phone out with trembling hands and tried to dial emergency services. One bar, then none. The call wouldn't go through. The flashlight beam felt smaller now, like it couldn't protect me from the idea of what might be happening upstairs while I was trapped below. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. At first, nothing. Then a faint sound of drawers opening in the kitchen, followed by a soft clink like metal touching metal keys maybe, or a utensil. The intruder wasn't searching frantically. He was moving like he belonged there. A slow footstep crossed the kitchen floor above me. Then another. Then the sound of the living room couch shifting slightly, as if someone had sat down. That detail made my blood run cold because it wasn't just burglary anymore. It was invasion. It was someone making themselves comfortable in my home while I sat trapped in the dark below. I started pushing again. Shoulder, hip, full body weight, trying to break the latch, and the door didn't move. Then I heard a sound directly above my head that didn't belong to the house. The slow, deliberate drag of something heavy across the kitchen floor, like a chair being pulled toward the basement door. My mouth went dry. He was barricading it. He wanted me down here. I backed away 2 steps and aimed my flashlight up at the door, as if light could burn through it. In the silence between thunder hits, a voice came from the other side, low and close, as if he'd knelt down to speak through the crack. "Stay down there." The words were almost gentle, almost amused. I didn't answer. I just held my breath until my lungs ached. The voice continued casual, like he was giving directions. "The power will come back. Don't run it." Then I heard him stand the shift of weight, the slow footsteps retreating into the house. I was left alone with the hum of the storm outside and the truth inside my chest. He was not in a hurry because he wasn't afraid of me. He had taken my home and turned it into a cage. The instant the lights died, my security system woke up like it had been waiting for the dark. A sharp beep cut through the blackout, followed by that calm, robotic voice you only notice when it's telling you something you never wanted to hear. Front door. Open. For half a second my brain refused it. The power had gone out. The alarm panel shouldn't even have been talking. Then I remembered the backup battery. The system was still alive. It was just the rest of the house that had gone blind. The storm outside was violent, thunder cracking close enough to make the walls vibrate, rain punching the windows, and inside that one little speaker was suddenly the loudest thing in my life. Front door. Open it repeated, and the red status light on the keypad glowed like an eye. I stood in the hallway with my phone in my hand, staring at the keypad, listening for any sound from the entryway. No footsteps, no rattling chain, just the rain, and somewhere in the darkness, the front door that was no longer fully closed. My first thought was stupid and hopeful. Maybe the wind had pushed it. My second thought was the one that made my skin prickle. Wind doesn't turn a deadbolt. I didn't move right away because moving meant choosing a direction, and every direction felt wrong. If I went toward the front door, I might walk into someone standing in the dark. If I stayed where I was letting them decide what happened next. The keypad beeped again, then announced entry delay. A countdown I couldn't see ticking down, giving whoever opened the door time before the siren. I fumbled for the flashlight on the console table, clicked it on, and aimed it down the hallway toward the living room. The beam hit the wall, the framed pictures, the coat rack. Everything looked normal in pieces, like the house was assembling itself in front of me. I took one step forward, and the keypad voice said, entry delay. 30 seconds. The casualness of it made my stomach flip. 30 seconds until the siren. 30 seconds. Until my house screamed into the storm and maybe nobody heard it. I moved again, slow flashlight, beam sweeping. As I reached the end of the hall, lightning flashed through the living room window, and for one hard instant I saw the front door. It was open by maybe 2 inches, just enough for a sliver of blackness to cut into the frame. Not wide enough for the wind to have done it. Wide enough for a person to have done it quietly. The entryway rug looked damp. Another lightning flash, and I saw a second detail, a muddy footprint on the hardwood just inside the threshold. Then the room went dark again, and my flashlight beam became the only light, and the footprint disappeared outside the beam like it had never existed. The keypad said, 20 seconds. I whispered the disarm code to myself, trying to decide whether to punch it in. If I disarmed the system, I would be admitting I wanted quiet more than help. If I let it trigger, I was trusting that noise would save me. The storm made noise meaningless. I took another step, and the floorboard under me creaked. Immediately from somewhere near the front door, a soft sound answered another floorboard, not mine. A careful shift of weight. The intruder wasn't outside anymore. He was inside, close enough to hear me. My flashlight beam snapped toward the entryway, and for a second I saw nothing except the open crack of the door and the dark beyond. Then the beam caught a glint at knee height, something metallic like a buckle or a tool clipped to a belt. It vanished when the figure shifted back into shadow. The keypad said, 10 seconds. I didn't even realize I'd stopped breathing until my chest burned. Another step closer now, but still hidden like the person was using the wall to stay outside the beam. The rain and thunder were so loud that the only thing I could truly track was that soft, deliberate movement inside my home. The keypad voice changed tone slightly, as if it enjoyed the moment. 5, 4. I raised the flashlight higher, forcing the beam into the corner by the coat closet. The light hit a man's face for the first time, and the shock of it made me nearly drop the flashlight. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wasn't crouched like an animal. He was standing upright, pressed into the corner like it was his spot, eyes narrowed against the glare. He smiled as if we'd made eye contact on purpose. 3, 2. I backed up without looking where my feet were going, and my heel caught the edge of the rug. I stumbled, and the flashlight beam jerked up to the ceiling, then down to the floor. In that half second of lost light, he moved. First, the next time the beam found him, he was closer. One long step into the living room, shoulders angled toward me, hands low. The keypad finished the count. 1. And then the siren erupted a harsh grinding wail that flooded the house. Louder than thunder, louder than my own thoughts. The man didn't flinch. That was the part that terrified me most. He just stood there in the strobing chaos of lightning and my shaking flashlight, letting the siren scream, letting me panic, as if he knew exactly how long it would take for anyone to show up. I ran backward down the hall, toward the bedroom, the only room with a solid lock, and as I ran I heard him laugh once, a short breathy sound like this was entertainment. I slammed the bedroom door and locked it, then pressed my back against it, phone at my ear, trying to get a call out over the siren. The operator answered and I shouted my address, my voice breaking, and she told me officers were on the way. The siren continued relentless. The house felt like a vibrating cage. Through it all, I heard something else. Soft footsteps in the hallway outside my door, slow and measured. He wasn't fleeing. He was walking. The siren didn't scare him. It covered him. It drowned out the sound of his hands. The doorknob turned, slightly testing, then stopped, then turned again, a little more, like he was learning the resistance. I pressed harder against the door, trying to become a brace. The operator told me to stay quiet and stay put. I whispered, "He's right outside." The footsteps shifted, and then I heard a sound I will never forget because it was so intimate, the soft brush of fabric against the bottom of my door, like someone lowering themselves to the floor. The sirens screamed. Thunder cracked, and on the other side of the wood, inches from my feet, a voice spoke, almost tender, almost amused. "Your alarm is so loud," he said. "It makes it hard to hear you pray." I didn't realize how loud a house gets when it goes dark, until I was standing under hot water, eyes closed, and the entire world shut off, like someone yanked a cord out of the wall. 1 second, the bathroom fan was humming and the light above the mirror was glowing through the shower glass. The next second, the fan died mid-whir, the light snapped out, and the only thing left was the drum of rain on the roof and my own breathing bouncing around tile. The storm had been rolling in all evening. A steady thunderstorm that made the power flicker just enough to keep me on edge, but I still chose that moment to shower because I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself it was just weather. Then the blackout hit and the bathroom became a sealed box. The water kept running because pressure doesn't stop instantly, and that was almost worse. It meant the shower was still loud enough to hide other sounds. I froze, with shampoo in my hair, hand on the wall, trying to picture the layout beyond the curtain. Sink, straight ahead. Toilet, to the right door behind me. Simple, in daylight. In the dark, it felt like a maze. I reached for the curtain edge and pulled it back an inch, to peek out, and all I saw was black, so thick it looked like smoke. Lightning flashed outside, and for a split second the bathroom lit up in harsh, blue-white. And in that frozen flash I saw something that didn't belong, and the door wasn't fully closed, the way I always shut it. It was cracked open, maybe 2 inches, just enough to leave a thin wedge of darkness beyond. Then the lightning died, and the wedge swallowed everything again. I stood there listening for footsteps, but the water was still roaring, and my mind kept trying to help by inventing explanations. Maybe the door hadn't latched. Maybe the pressure shift from the storm moved it. Maybe I was seeing it wrong. Then the water temperature changed. Not gradually the way it does when someone else turns on a faucet. It changed abruptly, going from hot to lukewarm, as if a hand had turned a valve somewhere else in the house. My heart kicked hard. I had no roommates. No one should have been touching anything. I turned the handle, trying to push the heat back up, and the water responded by fading again, losing pressure in slow, deliberate steps. Someone was shutting off the main. That's when I heard it, through the thinning stream, soft but unmistakable. A careful scrape on the other side of the bathroom door, like a shoe sole shifting on hardwood, followed by a pause. Whoever was out there was listening too. I snatched my phone from the little shelf by the shampoo, almost dropping it because my hands were slick. The screen lit up and instantly felt like a beacon. I aimed it toward the crack of the door, and in the faint glow, I saw the hallway beyond nothing but a darker tunnel. I tried to call emergency services and watched the signal bounce between one bar and none, the little spinning icon mocking me. The water pressure dropped again, the sound of it diminishing until the bathroom was quiet enough that I could hear something else breathing. Not mine. Slow, controlled breathing, just outside the door, close enough that if I took one step forward, I might bump into whoever it was. I backed deeper into the shower, heart pounding, trying to make myself small behind a curtain that suddenly felt paper thin. Lightning flashed again, and the bathroom lit up, and in that brutal half-second I saw a shadow on the tile floor beyond the crack of the door, long and angled, like someone standing sideways to stay out of sight. When darkness returned, the breathing got closer. A fingertip touched the outside of the shower curtain, dragging lightly down the plastic as if tracing where I stood. My skin broke out in goosebumps, despite the damp heat. I didn't scream because screaming would confirm exactly where I was. I didn't move because movement would make noise. I just stared at the curtain, waiting for it to pull back. Instead, a voice spoke low and calm, as if it was in the room with me. "You're wasting the battery." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't angry. It was almost conversational, like advice. My phone screen dimmed, and I realized with a sick jolt that the only light I had was already timing out. I tapped it awake, and the glow returned. And in that glow, I saw the curtain bulge inward slightly. Not from air, from pressure, like a hand resting on it. Then the water died completely. The sudden silence was so complete, it made my ears ring. In that silence, the voice came again closer to the curtain now. "Turn it off," he said, meaning my phone. The idea of going blind on command made panic flare in my throat, but the worse idea was him seeing my outline through the plastic and knowing exactly how to reach me. My phone vibrated with a low battery, warning the screen brightness dipping like a dying flashlight. I did the only thing that felt like control. I dropped the phone into my swimsuit pile on the shower floor to hide the light, and I held my breath. The bathroom went truly dark. In the dark, I heard the soft click of the bathroom lock turning from the outside. Not to lock me in because it was already me in here, but to make sure it was closed, like he was sealing a jar. Then, the shower curtain moved. It didn't yank open. It slid an inch, then another, slow enough that my brain could track every millimeter. I raised my hands blindly in front of me and felt the cold air from outside the shower. I smelled wet fabric and something metallic like pennies. Lightning flashed again, and the bathroom exploded into light, and in that single frame I saw him through the opening, a man crouched low, one hand gripping the curtain edge, his face tilted up toward me, with a small smile as if we were sharing a secret. He wasn't soaked from the storm. His hair was dry, his shoulders were dry. That detail hit harder than the crowbar could have, because it meant he hadn't just come from outside. He had been in my house before the power went out, waiting for the moment I was most exposed. The lightning died, and he vanished back into black. But now I had the picture, and my body finally chose action. I shoved the curtain toward him with both hands and lunged out of the shower, grabbing for the towel rack for balance. My wet feet slid on tile. I crashed into the sink, knocking something over, and the clatter sounded like gunfire in the quiet. I found the bathroom door by memory and threw my weight into it. It didn't open because the lock had been turned. I fumbled for it, fingers slipping, and behind me I heard him stand. The shift of his weight was so close it felt like a presence pressing into my back. He didn't rush. He didn't have to. The lock finally clicked free under my shaking hand, and I yanked the door open into the hallway. The darkness outside was absolute, but lightning flashed again, and I saw the hallway wall, and at the far end I saw a second figure standing near my bedroom doorway, as if this had always been a two-person job. The flash ended and the world went black again, and in the black I ran barefoot and dripping toward the front door, because it was the only direction I could justify without thinking. I hit the doorknob and found the deadbolt already unlocked. That was the moment I understood the plan. They didn't need to break in. They needed me to stop thinking I was safe. I ripped the door open, and the rain slapped my face, and the cold night air felt like a life raft. I screamed for my neighbors until porch lights snapped on up and down the street, and only then did I hear movement behind me. Quick footsteps, retreating into the dark interior of my house, avoiding the lightning like it belonged to them. When the police came, they walked through every room with bright flashlights and found no one. The bathroom lock worked fine. The windows were shut. The only thing they couldn't explain was the main water valve in the basement turned neatly to off, as if by a homeowner. 2 days later, when the power was stable again, and the storm was a memory, I found my phone under the bathroom mat, where it had slid in the chaos. The screen was cracked, and on the lock screen in the dim reflection, I could see a smudged fingerprint right where someone had pressed it awake. The worst part about a blackout is how quickly you start doing math in your head, how long your phone will last, how many batteries you have, how far away help is, how many corners your flashlight can't reach. My blackout night started like a checklist. Thunderstorm power out. Okay. I had a portable generator in the garage for exactly this reason. I'd practiced starting it twice. I rolled it out under the overhang to keep it dry, checked the oil, turned the fuel valve, pulled the cord and listened to it cough to life with that steady engine rumble that makes you feel smart and prepared. The floodlight I plugged into it snapped on and threw clean white light across my driveway. My kitchen came back to life, one appliance at a time. I felt my shoulders loosen for the first time in an hour. I told myself the night had tried to scare me, and I'd handled it. Then 15 minutes later the generator sputtered like it was choking and died. Not gradually, not from running out of gas. It died with the abrupt finality of something being cut. The floodlight blinked out, and my driveway fell back into darkness so fast it made me dizzy. In the silence after the engine stopped, I heard something I hadn't noticed while it was running. A faint scraping sound near the side gate, like metal on wood, followed by a pause. Someone was moving when the noise covered them, and freezing when it didn't. My first instinct was to stay inside, but the generator was outside, and my brain made the same stupid promise it always makes in fear. Fix the problem and you'll feel safe again. I grabbed a heavy flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle, enough to make everything shine. I swept the beam across the driveway and found the generator sitting where I left it, dark and harmless looking. I walked toward it, and the beam caught something that made my stomach tighten. The extension cord wasn't just unplugged. It had been pulled hard enough that the plug casing was cracked. That meant someone had been close enough to touch it. I crouched by the generator, fingers shaking as I checked the switches. Everything was set correctly. The fuel tank was half full. I pulled the cord again. Nothing. No cough. No resistance. It felt wrong, too loose, like something inside wasn't connected. Then I saw it in the flashlight beam. The fuel line had been sliced cleanly. A neat cut, like a blade, had kissed rubber and moved on. Gas glistened on the concrete, a dark, wet patch spreading slowly. That wasn't weather. That was sabotage. I stood up too fast, scanning the yard. The beam bounced across the fence, the gate, the shrubs, finding nothing but rain-slick leaves. But the silence felt occupied, like eyes were watching from somewhere my light didn't land. I started backing toward the porch, and that's when the motion light at the side of my house flickered on for a second, and then died immediately, as if someone had unscrewed the bulb just enough to make it fail when it mattered. In that brief, weak burst of light, I saw a shape at the edge of my yard, near the gate. A person standing perfectly still, shoulders, squared face, turned toward my house. Then it went dark again and my flashlight beam swung there too late. The shape was gone. I backed up faster, boots slipping slightly on wet concrete, and as I reached the porch steps, I heard the softest sound behind me, a footstep on grass. Not running, not chasing, just closing distance with confidence. I spun and aimed the flashlight low and got the reveal I will never forget. A pair of shoes, dry, planted on my lawn 2 steps from the driveway, as if the person had stepped out of the night and stopped precisely where the light would hit. The beam climbed and caught a man's torso, a dark hoodie, hands at his sides, and when it finally hit his face, he didn't squint. He smiled, like he'd been waiting for me to look. I stumbled backward up the porch steps and reached for the door handle, without taking my eyes off him. The knob turned, but the door didn't open. The deadbolt was still locked, and my hand was shaking too hard to coordinate the key. The man stayed on the lawn, not rushing, just watching me fumble like this was the whole point of the exercise. Then he raised one hand slightly, not waving, just showing me something small and metallic between his fingers. My keys. He held them up in the flashlight beam, and tilted them so they chimed softly, a tiny sound that somehow cut through the drizzle. The air went cold in my chest, because now I understood he hadn't just cut the fuel line. He'd been close enough to lift my keys from my kitchen counter earlier while the generator was running, and I was congratulating myself on being prepared. He took one step forward, and I finally got the deadbolt turned, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside. I slammed it, and relocked it, with my whole body pressed against the wood, then backed away into the darkness of my living room, with the flashlight sweeping wildly. My phone was on the coffee table and I grabbed it, but the battery was already low from the earlier outage and the screen dimmed with that warning that makes you feel betrayed. I dialed emergency services anyway, and the call began to connect, and then the phone died in my hand the moment the first ring sounded. The screen went black. I stood there, staring at my dead phone like it was a joke. Outside, the porch light didn't work. The motion light was useless, and my generator was bleeding fuel onto the driveway. The house was a box of darkness again, and I could hear him outside. Now, not banging, not yelling, just moving around the perimeter, with soft, deliberate steps, checking windows the way you check doors on a car you plan to steal. Then very close to the glass of my living room window, I heard a quiet tapping, slow and patient like a knuckle-testing thickness. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Lightning flashed in the distance, and for a split second the room brightened enough that I saw my own reflection in the window, and behind that reflection I saw his face, inches from the glass, eyes wide and calm, breath fogging the pain. The flash ended and he disappeared again, but the fog remained a pale smear on the window that marked exactly where he was standing in the dark. I backed away barefoot now on hardwood, and my heel hit something soft. I looked down with my flashlight and saw a wet footprint trail leading from my back door into my kitchen. The footprints were fresh. The drizzle hadn't reached them. They were inside my house. And in the silence that followed that realization, I heard the soft scrape of metal against metal from the kitchen, like someone sliding a knife out of a drawer with no hurry at all. The knock came at 2:07 a.m., right when the storm finally started to lull me into thinking the worst part was over, and the timing alone made my skin crawl because nobody knocks on a stranger's door in the middle of a blackout unless they're either desperate or dangerous. My entire street was dark, the kind of darkness that turns windows into black mirrors, and the only light in my living room was a candle I'd set in a glass bowl to keep it from tipping. I was sitting on the floor with my phone in my hand, watching the battery percentage drop like sand in an hourglass, when the knock hit again. 3 taps, evenly spaced, firm but not frantic. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. Because in a blackout, you learn fast that silence is information. Then a voice came through the door loud enough to cut through the rain, but calm enough to sound rehearsed. Utility company. We're restoring service. I need you to open up so I can check your main panel. Every word was wrong. Utility crews don't go door to door during active storms, and they definitely don't ask homeowners to open their doors in the middle of the night when the whole neighborhood is out. Still, my brain tried to cling to the comfort of an explanation, because fear will accept a lie if it means you don't have to fight reality. I stayed quiet. The voice continued slightly sharper now, like he expected compliance. Ma'am, sir, whoever's in there, this is for your safety. We have a live line issue. I need you at the door. I crept closer, keeping the candle behind me so the glow wouldn't silhouette me in the sidelights. I peeked through the peephole and saw something that almost worked on me. A man in a reflective jacket, hood up, standing just far enough back that the peephole distorted his face. Rain streaked off his shoulders. In his hand he held what looked like a clipboard. Then lightning flashed, and in that harsh instant light I saw the details, and the darkness had softened. The reflective stripes were cheap tape, unevenly cut. The clipboard was just a piece of plastic, and the badge clipped to his chest was blank, no logo, no name, just a rectangle catching the light. The flash died, and his face sank back into shadow, but he was smiling. He knew I was looking. I backed away from the door so fast, my heel bumped the baseboard. The man's voice dropped lower, closer to the door now, like he'd stepped in. I can see your candle, he said. It's fine. Just crack the door. I'll explain. That was the moment the air in my lungs turned to ice, because I had been careful. I had kept the candle away from the window line. I had stayed behind walls. He shouldn't have been able to see anything unless he was looking from a different angle. I glanced toward the living room window, and my stomach sank. The blinds were down, but not all the way there was a narrow gap where the slats didn't fully close. From the porch, he could see the flicker. He wasn't guessing. He was watching. Another knock harder. Open the door, he said, and the friendly tone was gone. My phone had 1 bar of service that kept flickering to none. I dialed anyway, and held it to my ear, praying for a connection while I backed toward the hallway where my bedroom door had the best lock. The call wouldn't go through. Outside he shifted his weight, and I heard something scrape near the side of my house, metal against concrete, like someone at the breaker box. My home went from dark to darker, if that makes sense, because even the faint glow of my router lights and appliance clocks had vanished earlier. But now I could feel the absence of any outside ambient light too, as if a porch fixture had been unscrewed or a floodlight had been disabled. The utility worker wasn't alone, or he didn't need to be. He had options. He knocked again, then tried the doorknob once slow, like a test. It didn't rattle like a desperate person. It turned with purpose, the way you check if someone remembered to lock up. Then he spoke softly, right at the door, intimate, like he was leaning in. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, which is exactly what people say when they want you to open a door so they can hurt you. Lightning flashed again, and through the peephole I saw him closer now, almost filling the circle of glass. His smile was wider. Behind him, just at the edge of the porch, I saw a second shadow, unmoving, like a person standing where the peephole couldn't fully catch them. The flash ended and the porch returned to black, and I realized the second figure wasn't a trick of light. It was the reason he sounded so confident. I backed into my bedroom, locked the door, and shoved my dresser an inch forward, with my knee just enough to make the lock feel less lonely. I dialed again, pressing the phone against the window to catch signal. This time the call connected, and I whispered my address like I was confessing something. The operator told me to stay put, stay quiet, officers were coming. Outside my bedroom door, the house was silent, but on my front porch, the man was still there. I could tell because every so often over the rain I'd hear the faint tick of his knuckle against the doorframe, slow and patient like a clock. Then, as if he'd decided I needed motivation, the utility worker spoke again louder now for the whole dark house to hear. "Okay," he announced. "I'm going to shut your water off until you open the door. Safety protocol." A minute later the pipes groaned, and the sink in my bathroom let out a hollow gurgle like it was swallowing air. The message was clear. He didn't need electricity to control my comfort. He could turn my home into a pressure box, piece by piece, until I did what he wanted. I stayed in my room and listened to my own heartbeat, until distant sirens finally pierced the storm. When the police arrived and their flashlights swept the porch, there was no reflective jacket, no clipboard, no footsteps in the wet grass. But on my front door, right beneath the peephole, was a small smear, where someone's fingertip had dragged through the moisture like a signature, and scratched lightly into the paint just above the lock were 3 shallow marks, like someone had tapped with a key until the metal bit. The breathing started after the candles were lit, and the house had settled into that uneasy blackout stillness, the kind where you can hear your refrigerator silence, as if it's a sound of its own. The storm had knocked power out across half the county, and at first I did everything the right way. Flashlight candles in safe holders, doors checked twice, phone on low power. I even tried to laugh at myself for being tense because the rational part of my brain kept saying, "It's just darkness, it's just weather." Then I went to bed, because what else do you do at midnight when the entire world is off? And I told myself sleep would reset me. I woke up an hour later to a sound that didn't fit a slow inhale from the far corner of my bedroom, followed by an exhale that was just a little too wet, a little too close to be the house. I held still and listened, because the first instinct in fear is always denial. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the wind through the vent. Maybe it was the dog. Then it came again steady and controlled, and I realized with a cold clarity that it wasn't coming from the hallway or outside the window. It was inside my room. I couldn't see the corner. The candle on my dresser gave off just enough light to make shapes out of furniture, but it couldn't reach the far side, where my closet door met the wall. The darkness there felt thicker, like it had weight. I didn't move my head. I didn't even blink, if I could help it. I just listened to the breathing and tried to map it the way you'd map footsteps in a hallway. Inhale, exhale. A pause, like whoever it was listening for me to react. My phone was on the nightstand face down, and the urge to flip it over for light was almost physical, like a muscle spasm. But light would outline me. Light would tell the corner exactly where I was. I tried to speak, and couldn't at first. My throat locked up around the simplest words. When I finally forced sound out, it was a whisper that didn't even sound like my voice. "Who's there?" The breathing stopped immediately, and the sudden absence was worse than the sound, because now I had proof it was responding. The corner went silent, as if it had never been alive. I lay there in the candle's weak glow, staring into black, waiting for movement, waiting for the lie of normal to return. Then, very softly, the breathing resumed, but it wasn't in the corner anymore. It was closer and slightly to the left, like whoever was there had shifted position without making a single footstep sound. I felt my scalp tighten. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before the candle flame was bending. Not flickering the way flames do when they're dying, but leaning as if a slow current of air was moving through the room from the closet side toward the bed. No window was open. No fan was on. I raised my hand slowly into the air, palm out, testing like a blind person, and I felt it just the faintest cool drift across my skin. Air moving around a body. Someone exhaling in a dark room changes the air. My heart hammered so hard I felt it in my teeth. I slid my hand under the pillow and wrapped my fingers around the only thing that felt like a weapon, my heavy metal water bottle. And I kept my eyes on the candle because it was the only honest thing in the room. The breathing shifted again closer now, and I could swear I smelled something faint and human in the dark, wet fabric skin and that metallic scent like coins. The rational part of me tried to plan, get out of bed, get to the hallway, get to the front door, call for help. But the other part of me, the part that was purely animal, knew that standing up would be the moment I became vulnerable. It's hard to fight when you're halfway between lying down and running. The breathing stopped again, and in that silence, I heard something else. The softest scrape of fabric against carpet right beside the bed like someone kneeling. The candle flame leaned hard for a second, pulled toward the edge of the dresser, and then steadied. I couldn't take it anymore. I flipped my phone over, and the screen lit my face in cold blue. And in that brief, ugly light, I saw the truth reflected in the black glass of my closet door. A silhouette standing near my bed, close enough that the outline of shoulders was unmistakable. Not a coat rack, not a trick of furniture. A person. The silhouette moved the second the light came on, sliding back into darkness as if it belonged to it. I rolled out of bed and ran for the bedroom door, nearly tripping over my own sheets, water bottle raised like it mattered. My fingers hit the knob and turned it, and the door opened, but not fully. Something was pressing from the other side, gentle but firm, like a hand holding it almost shut. My lungs seized. I pushed harder, and the door gave another inch, and through that inch came a whisper so close it felt like breath on my knuckles. "Don't turn on lights," the voice said. "You'll wake them." I slammed my whole body against the door, and it burst open into the hallway, and the candlelight spilled out like a weak spill of safety. The hallway was empty. The air was cold. The rest of the house was still black. Behind me in my bedroom, the candle flame was still burning, but the breathing was gone, replaced by something quieter and somehow worse. The soft, slow creak of my closet door, moving as if someone inside it had shifted their weight and leaned against the hinge. I didn't go back in. I ran to the bathroom, locked it, and called 911. With the phone pressed to the window until I got enough signal to connect. When the police arrived, they searched every room, every closet, every inch of the house, and they found nothing but my own fear bouncing around in the corners. They told me blackout nights make people jumpy. They told me storms play tricks. Then one officer paused at my closet, leaned in, and shined his flashlight along the floor. He didn't say anything right away. He just pointed. There in the dust, along the baseboard, were two clean scuffs, shaped like the toes of shoes, as if someone had been standing in that corner for a long time, without moving, breathing quietly, waiting for me to fall asleep again. The blackout turned my hallway into a throat, and I made the mistake of walking through it barefoot because I didn't want shoes to announce me. The storm had already been chewing on the neighborhood for hours, and when the power finally died, it wasn't dramatic, no flicker, no warning, just a clean cut that erased every familiar outline at once. I lit one candle in the kitchen, not because it made me feel safe, but because it proved I was still in control of something. The flame was small and steady, and in that tiny circle of light, my counters and cabinets looked normal. Everything beyond it looked like a place where something could stand without being seen. My phone was at 15%. I set it face down to save it, and I told myself I would stay right there until the lights came back. Then, I heard the drip. It was faint at first, the kind of sound you can explain away as a leaky faucet, or rain in the gutters. But it didn't come from the kitchen sink. It came from the hallway. Drip. Pause. Drip. The pauses were too even like a metronome. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on the storm outside, and the candle in front of me. But the drip kept pulling my attention, like a finger hooking under my chin, forcing my head to turn. I picked up my flashlight, the good one, with fresh batteries, and aimed it toward the hall. The beam showed me only what it touched the edge of the runner rug, the baseboards, the closed bathroom door. No water, no stain, no obvious source. The dripping continued, still steady, still patient. The worst part about darkness is how quickly you start imagining the shape of a problem bigger than it is. I thought of burst pipes. I thought of the ceiling leaking. I thought of a raccoon in the attic. I thought of someone bleeding quietly, somewhere I couldn't see. That last thought came uninvited, and it stayed. I stepped forward, flashlight leading, moving slow enough that the beam didn't jitter. The hallway smelled slightly different than the kitchen, damp and cool, like the air had been disturbed. The drip sounded closer now, and it wasn't coming from above. It was coming from somewhere low, near the floor, near the bedroom end of the hall. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself I was being stupid, but my body didn't care what my brain believed. I took another step, and my foot landed on something slick, cold, wet. It wasn't a puddle, like spilled water. It had thickness to it, a cling that grabbed my skin for a fraction of a second before letting go. I jerked my foot back on instinct, and nearly fell, because the runner rug shifted. The flashlight beam swung down and caught the shine on the hardwood where my toes had been. A small smear, darker than the wood, glossy in the light. The drip continued. Drip. Drip. I lifted my foot, and the beam caught the underside of it. The wetness wasn't clear. It was dark, almost black, with a flashlight glare, and it made the skin between my toes look bruised. My stomach turned. I swallowed hard, and tried to breathe through my nose to keep from gagging. The rational part of my brain shouted at me to back away, to lock myself somewhere, to stop investigating. But the drip kept going, and the wet spot on my foot kept reminding me that whatever it was fresh. I aimed the flashlight higher and traced the source by instinct, searching for a trail. The beam found it a thin line of droplets, spaced evenly, leading away from where I'd stepped, and toward the living room, as if something wet had moved through the hallway, one slow step at a time. The droplets were too deliberate to be a leak. They were footprints without the print. Drip. Drip. And then from the darkness at the living room end I heard the softest sound of all fabric rubbing against fabric, like someone shifting their shoulders while standing perfectly still. The air in the hall felt suddenly too tight. I held the flashlight beam on the droplets, and forced myself not to swing it wildly, because wild light is what panic looks like, and I didn't want to show panic to whatever was listening. Hello, I tried to say it like a challenge. It came out as a breathy whisper. The dripping stopped immediately. The silence after it was so abrupt it felt like the house had been muted. In that silence I heard my own blood in my ears, and the faint controlled inhale of someone who had been holding their breath. The flashlight beam jerked up despite my effort, cutting a harsh line across the living room doorway. I saw my couch, the coffee table, the blank TV screen. Nothing moved. Then lightning flashed outside, bright enough to fill the room for half a heartbeat. And in that flash I saw something on the living room floor that my flashlight hadn't reached, a dark shape near the far wall, low and hunched, as if someone was crouched behind the armchair, with their head tilted toward the hallway. The flash died, and the shape dissolved back into black. My body finally chose for me. I backed up fast, heels sliding on hardwood, smearing the wetness without meaning to, and I turned toward the bathroom because it was the closest lock. My hand hit the bathroom doorknob and twisted, and the door opened a few inches before stopping hard. Not locked, blocked. Something on the other side was pressed against it. A towel rack, a fallen hamper, or a person leaning their weight into it, silent, patient, using my own house like a puzzle with pieces they'd already arranged. I didn't scream. I didn't even have air for it. I stumbled backward, flashlight beam, shaking now, and the living room darkness answered with a soft, wet step on hardwood. One step, careful and close, like someone had decided I'd had enough freedom. I ran to the kitchen, snatched my phone, and as the screen lit up, it reflected off the wet smear on my foot and made it look almost red. I dialed with shaking fingers. No service. 1 bar. No service. Behind me, the hallway made a sound like someone dragging the toe of a shoe slowly along the baseboard. A lazy scrape meant to announce presence without urgency. The candle flame bent as if a body passed near it, stealing air. And then right beside my ear, a voice whispered with the calm certainty of someone already inside your life. You stepped in it. My dog has never growled at nothing, and that's why the blackout night still lives in my muscles like a reflex. The power died during a hard rain, the kind that rattles windows and makes the whole house feel like it's floating on sound, and I did what I always do, locked the doors, lit 2 candles, and sat on the couch, with my dog pressed against my shin, like a warm anchor. The candles made the living room soft around the edges, shadows rounding everything into something almost peaceful. The storm outside was loud enough to cover most small noises, which I told myself was a comfort because it meant I wouldn't hear every creak of the house settling. I was wrong, because there are certain sounds you only notice when you're supposed to. My dog lifted his head first, his ears tilted forward like radar. His body went still, not relaxed, still but tense like a wire pulled tight. He stared at the far end of the couch, the empty cushion where no one sits, and a low rumble started in his chest. Not barking, not whining, a warning. I whispered his name, trying to soothe him without moving too much. His eyes didn't leave the cushion. The rumble deepened into a growl that made the candle flame tremble slightly in the moving air. I looked where he looked and my brain tried to do the normal thing, identify shapes, match them to furniture, dismiss the rest. The couch looked the same as always. Throw blanket folded over the arm, 2 pillows, the seam line down the middle, cushion. Nothing. But my dog wasn't reacting to nothing. He inched forward, hackles rising, and his growl turned sharper, more angry, directed like a beam. The hair on my arms lifted. I raised my flashlight and clicked it on, aiming it at the couch cushion. The beam made the fabric texture pop into sharp detail. Still nothing. No shadow. No movement. My dog's growl didn't stop. It intensified, and he bared his teeth at the cushion, like it had a face. I felt ridiculous and terrified at the same time, and that combination is the worst, because it makes you hesitate. I leaned forward and tapped the cushion with my hand, just to prove to myself it was empty. The moment my fingers touched the fabric, my dog snapped not at my hand, but at the air above the cushion, teeth clicking shut on nothing. The sound was loud in the blackout, quiet. My heart slammed. The candle flame bent hard, pulled toward the couch as if something moved between it and the air. I jerked my hand back, and my dog lunged onto the couch, claws scraping fabric, growling so deep it vibrated the cushions. He pawed at the empty spot, frantic now, like something was there that he could smell but couldn't pin down. Then the couch cushion sank, just slightly, like a person's knee had pressed into it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a jump scare. It was a subtle depression that my eyes might have dismissed if I hadn't been staring at it. The flashlight beam held steady on the spot, and the fabric dipped again deeper, as if weight shifted from one point to another. My mouth went dry. My dog's growl turned into a bark, and he snapped. Again, this time connecting with something, because he yelped instantly and recoiled, ears flattening. He stumbled backward off the couch and tucked behind my legs, trembling eyes, still locked on the cushion but now full of fear instead of aggression. Dogs don't retreat like that unless something hurt them. I stood up so fast the flashlight beam jumped to the ceiling and back, and in that brief loss of light I heard a soft sound from the couch. A quiet exhale, controlled and close, like someone breathing out through their nose while trying not to be heard. I aimed the flashlight back at the cushion, and the depression was gone. The fabric looked smooth again. My dog whined once low in his throat. The candle flame steadied. The room tried to become normal. I didn't let it. I backed away from the couch without turning my back on it, and I grabbed my phone from the coffee table. The battery was low, the signal weak, but I dialed anyway, and held it up like a talisman. The call began to ring, and then dropped. I tried again. 1 bar. None. The storm was eating the towers, or someone was, and I couldn't tell the difference. I retreated down the hallway toward the bedroom dock, pressed against my calf, and the living room stayed silent behind me. Too silent. Like someone was waiting for me to go far enough away that they could move without my flashlight catching them. I locked myself in the bedroom and sat on the floor with the dog in my lap, listening. Minutes passed. The rain hammered the roof. Thunder rolled. Nothing else. I started to wonder if fear had infected both of us, if my dog had reacted to a scent from outside, if the cushion dip had been my imagination. Then from the living room I heard the couch springs creak slow and deliberate, like someone was sitting down carefully in the dark, settling their weight into the exact spot my dog had been growling at, making themselves comfortable in my home, as if the blackout had granted them permission. The scraping started before I even realized I was holding my breath. 1 minute I was sitting on my bedroom floor with a candle on the dresser, listening to the storm chew on the roof and telling myself the blackout was just an inconvenience. The next minute, something dragged itself down the outside of my bedroom door with a slow, deliberate rasp that made my teeth ache. It wasn't the random scratch of a branch against siding. It wasn't the soft pop of the house settling. It was contact, pressure, a hard edge, moving along wood, like someone was testing how much sound they could make without making me scream. I froze with my back against the bed frame, candlelight trembling across the carpet, and tried to locate it by ear. The sound came again closer to the bottom of the door. This time a long scrape followed by a pause, like whoever was out there had stopped to listen for me to move. Then another scrape shorter, higher. The pattern felt intentional, like Morse code for panic. I lifted my flashlight, but didn't turn it on because the candle was already enough light to betray my outline if someone was watching through the crack. My phone was in my hand, screen dark battery on low power, and the storm kept stealing my signal in and out like a cruel joke. The scraping continued, and after the third pass, I realized something worse. It wasn't coming from the hallway wall. It was coming from my door itself, right on the other side, as if someone was inches away close enough to press their face to the wood and breathe. The next sound was a gentle tap, not on the knob but just above it, like a fingernail against paint. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Then the scraping resumed, and this time it angled toward the knob, down along the seam where the door meets the frame, like someone was running a thin object through the gap. I remembered every stupid safety article I'd ever read about credit carding a latch, and my stomach turned because my bedroom lock wasn't a deadbolt. It was a cheap interior lock that was meant to keep kids from barging in, not to stop a stranger who was patient and practiced. I crawled toward the dresser, slowly keeping my weight on my palms so the floorboards wouldn't complain. The candle flame leaned slightly, reacting to movement in the air, and I hated that even my light could betray me by showing the direction of breath. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could reach without making noise, a thick hardcover book and a metal water bottle, and I pressed them to my chest. Like that could make me braver. Another scrape, longer this time, and I heard a faint click at the latch, a tiny sound that shouldn't have been possible unless something had shifted. My throat went tight. I whispered into the phone anyway, trying to start a call without lighting the screen, but the screen woke up and washed my hands in cold blue. No service. One bore. No service. The scraping stopped the second the screen lit. The silence that followed was so absolute, it felt like my ears were filling with pressure. Then, from the other side of the door, a soft inhale. Not loud enough to be a mistake. Just a controlled breath taken by someone who knew exactly how close they were. I backed away until my shoulders hit the bed, and that's when the doorknob moved. Not rattled. Not yanked. It turned slowly, smoothly, like a hand was trying to see how far it could go without making the latch snap. The knob returned to neutral. Then it turned again a little farther, and I heard the faintest squeak of metal. My candle flame bent toward the door, as if the air was being displaced by a body leaning in. I tried to speak to warn him to bluff, to do anything that made me feel less like prey, but the words died in my mouth because I could picture him clearly. Not panicking, not rushing, just listening to the room the way a hunter listens to brush. The scraping started again lower now, right at the bottom edge of the door, and I understood what he was doing. He wasn't only trying the latch. He was making me imagine what tool he had. Knife, screwdriver, crowbar, fingernail. The uncertainty was the weapon. I shuffled to the side and pressed my ear to the wall instead of the door, trying to hear if there were footsteps, if there was more than one person. The storm outside rumbled, but under it I caught something that made my blood go cold. The soft sound of fabric moving in the hallway, like someone shifting their stance. And then a second sound farther away, a faint tap from the living room area. 2 points of sound. 2 positions. Either he had help, or he was moving and using the storm to cover it. The knob turned again, this time with a firmer grip, and I felt the latch press against the strike plate. The candle's glow flickered once, as if someone had passed between it and the air. My phone buzzed, with a low battery warning. I stared at the percentage, 4%, and felt like I was watching a countdown to blindness. I tried calling again. This time, it rang once, then dropped. The scraping on the door changed, becoming faster, more excited, like he could hear the failure through the wood, and it amused him. The sound climbed up the door in a slow arc, and then stopped right at eye level, and in the quiet that followed, a whisper seeped through the seam, soft as dust. "I like this one," the voice said, like he was reviewing rooms in my house. I squeezed my eyes shut, not because it helped, but because it kept me from turning my head too quickly and making noise. The whisper came again, closer to the keyhole. "Don't move," it said, and it wasn't a threat. It was instruction like he expected obedience. I held my breath. The doorknob turned, and for a second I thought the door was going to swing open, and that the candlelight would finally show me the face behind the voice. Instead, the knob returned to stillness, and something thin slid into the gap between the door and the frame, with a soft, wet sound like tape peeling. The latch clicked. Not fully, just enough to tell me it had shifted. I stood up too fast, and the floorboard betrayed me with a single creak. On the other side of the door, the scraping stopped instantly. Then the voice laughed, once a short breath of amusement. "There you are," it whispered. The latch clicked again, and the door opened the width of a finger. Candlelight spilled into the hallway like a weak confession. In that narrow slice of darkness I saw nothing. No shoes, no hand, just black. Then lightning flashed outside, and for a split second the hallway lit up in cold white, and in that flash I saw a gloved hand, pale leather fingers curled around the edge of my door from the outside, holding it barely open, keeping it from swinging wider, like whoever was there didn't want me to see them yet. The flash died. The hand was gone. The door remained open, that tiny amount breathing. I slammed it shut with my shoulder and threw my weight against it, book in one hand, water bottle in the other. The knob turned hard, once testing me, and then stopped. The silence stretched so long, my legs started to shake. Then softly right outside the door, the scraping resumed. But it wasn't on the outside anymore. It was on my side. A faint rasp across the wood, just inches from my face, as if something sharp was being dragged along the inside surface, while I was pressed against it, as if the door itself had become a thin membrane, and he was already here. I stumbled back, candlelight spinning, and the scraping stopped. The next morning when the power was back, and the police walked through with calm voices and bright flashlights, they found no sign of forced entry. But when one officer examined my bedroom door closely, he frowned and ran his finger along a set of shallow scratches near the knob. Scratches that were on the inside of the door, carved into the paint at eye level like someone had stood in. My room in the dark, and tested the wood from my side while I was pressed against it from the other. I heard the operator pick up, and then my screen went black. That's the part that replays in my head. Not the footsteps, not the whispering, not even the way the house felt like it had turned hostile. Just that tiny timing, the exact moment help became real. My phone died, as if something had reached through the dark and pinched it off. The blackout had started an hour earlier, during the loudest part of the storm, when thunder cracked close enough to make car alarms chirp down the street. I had been careful, candles and glass doors, locked curtains drawn, flashlight within reach. I even kept my phone plugged into a portable battery pack, because I'd learned the hard way that wall outlets mean nothing when the grid goes down. The battery pack was half charged. The phone was at 9%. I told myself that was enough to last until morning, because denial loves math. Then the sound came from my kitchen, faint but unmistakable, the slow slide of a drawer, opening not all at once, but inch by inch, like someone didn't want the wooden rails to squeal. I sat up in bed so fast, the sheets tangled around my ankles. The candle on my dresser threw a small, steady glow, and in that glow my bedroom looked almost normal. The hallway beyond my door looked like a black tunnel. I listened. Rain. Distant thunder. Then the soft clink of metal touching metal like a spoon hitting the side of a drawer organizer. My skin went cold. No one else was supposed to be in my house. I grabbed my flashlight and kept it off because the candle already made me visible, and I didn't want to add a second beacon. I slid out of bed and crept to my bedroom door, pressing my ear near the seam. Another tiny sound from the kitchen closer now, like something being set gently on the counter. Then a footstep. Slow, careful, not stomping, not sneaking clumsily. A footstep placed with intention on hardwood. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I whispered hello once, hating how small it sounded, and the house answered by going still. Silence can be a response. I backed away from the door and locked it, then realized immediately how useless that lock was if the person outside had time. The candle flame leaned slightly toward the hallway, as if air was moving there, and I understood that whoever was in my kitchen wasn't just there. They were moving with the calm pace of someone who believed the dark belonged to them. I called 911. The screen lit my face blue, and the battery icon already looked thinner, weaker, like it was ashamed. The call rang once, twice. On the third ring I heard the faintest sound in the hallway, a soft shuffle like a bare foot on carpet, repositioning closer to my door. My pulse hammered. The operator answered, and relief hit me so hard it made me dizzy. 911. What's your emergency? I opened my mouth to speak my address, and at that exact moment, the phone vibrated with a low battery alert. The screen dimmed, and then it went completely black. No warning tone. No gradual fade. Just dead. I stared at it in my palm, pressing the side button again and again like I could bully it back to life. Nothing. The battery pack was still connected, cable snug, but the phone didn't respond like the life had been snuffed out of it. The room suddenly felt enormous and exposed, because the blue glow had been a tiny shield, even though it made me visible. Without it, the candle became my only light, and in that warm flicker I could see my own hands shaking. Outside my door, the hallway was quiet again, and that quiet felt different, now confident. Like whoever was out there had heard the ringing, had heard the operator's voice bleed faintly through my phone speaker, and had waited for the moment the connection died. I backed toward the window thinking maybe I could scream for neighbors, but the storm was still loud and the street was still dark. I tried turning the phone on again. Still nothing. Then I noticed something that turned my stomach. The portable battery pack's indicator lights were off too, even though it had been half charged. I pressed its button. No lights. Dead. That shouldn't have been possible. Battery packs don't die instantly unless they're damaged. Unless they're drained. Unless someone had swapped it. Unless it wasn't the same one anymore. The thought landed like a stone in my chest. Someone could have been in my room earlier. Someone could have touched my things in the dark. The candle flame trembled, and I realized the air in the room had shifted cooler on the back of my neck, like a door had opened or a body had moved behind me. I turned slowly, flashlight, finally clicking on because subtlety was pointless now, and the beam cut across the bedroom floor. Nothing. Bed. Dresser. Closet door. Half open. I didn't remember leaving it half open. Another footstep sounded in the hallway closer, and then the soft metallic click of my bedroom doorknob being tested. Once. Twice. My lock held, but the knob turn wasn't frantic. It was curious. It was someone learning. The candle flame leaned toward the door again, and I heard a sound right at the seam, the faint scrape of something thin against the latch plate, like a knife edge or a screwdriver tip working patiently. I grabbed the lamp from my nightstand out of pure instinct, forgetting the power was out and the uselessness of it made panic flare hot in my chest. I stumbled to the closet, not because it was safer, but because my brain wanted a hiding place. Any hiding place. I pulled the closet door mostly closed, leaving a crack to watch the room. Through that crack I saw the candlelight paint the carpet in soft gold, and I saw my bedroom door shiver slightly as pressure changed on the other side. The scraping continued, slow and methodical. Then it stopped. Silence. I held my breath. The knob turned again, and this time the door opened a fraction of an inch, the latch slipping just enough to give. Candlelight spilled into the hallway. In that thin gap I saw nothing but black until lightning flashed outside. and in that cold, brutal strobe, I saw a face inches from the gap eye, level with the crack, staring in as if it had been waiting for the door to breathe. The face didn't look surprised. It looked satisfied. The lightning died and the face vanished, but a voice came through the gap, immediately low and close. "No signal," it whispered, like it already knew the answer. My blood ran cold, because it meant he had planned around it. He had listened to the call. He had heard it die. Then, softly, from somewhere else in the house, another sound answered a second drawer, opening a second presence, moving, like the first voice wasn't alone, and the blackout had given them the time to spread out and choose. I stayed in the closet with the flashlight beam aimed at the door crack, trying to make myself smaller than my own breathing, and in the dead space where my phone should have been a lifeline, I heard the operator's voice in my memory like an echo, and I realized the cruelest part wasn't that the call failed. It was that help had been right there, and something in the dark had waited until it heard it, and then shut it off. I learned the hard way that darkness doesn't just take your sight, it steals your confidence in your own body, because you stop trusting what your hands touch. The blackout that night wasn't dramatic at first. The storm was loud, yes, but the power just clicked off, like someone flipped a switch, and the house immediately felt bigger and emptier, like the walls had pulled away from me. I lit 2 candles in the kitchen, and 1 in the living room, more for orientation than comfort, and I kept telling myself to stay put, to wait it out, to stop acting like every shadow was a person. But then I heard a sound in the hallway that didn't match the rain. Not a footstep, not a creak. A soft, dry brush, like fabric sliding against drywall. I stood still, candle flame reflecting in the dark window glass, and listened until my lungs hurt. Nothing else. I told myself it was the house settling, because that's what you tell yourself when you don't want to accept the alternative. My flashlight was on the counter. I reached for it, without taking my eyes off the hallway. The moment my fingers touched the rubber grip, something else touched me. A hand brushed against mine in the dark light, as a passing sleeve, but unmistakably skin on skin. The quick glide of fingers over my knuckles, as if someone had reached for the flashlight at the exact same time. I didn't scream right away, because my brain stalled, trying to categorize the sensation as an accident, a phantom, anything but what it was. Then the candle flame bent hard, pulled sideways by a shift of air that didn't come from the storm, and the skin on my arm prickled like a cold wave passed through it. I snatched my hand back so fast, I knocked the flashlight off the counter. It hit the floor and rolled its beam, stuttering across cabinets and chair legs, throwing the kitchen into jerky, broken frames. In one of those frames, the beam swept the hallway opening, and I saw a shape there for half a second, close enough that it should have been impossible to miss, but angled in a way that kept it mostly swallowed by the corner. The light moved again, and the shape was gone. My heart hammered so hard I felt it in my throat. I grabbed the flashlight off the floor and pinned the beam on the hallway like I could staple the darkness to the wall. "Who's there?" I said, and my voice came out thin, almost polite, which made me hate myself. Silence answered. The storm outside roared, and inside my house the quiet felt organized, as if someone was choosing when to make noise. I backed away from the hallway without lowering the beam, stepping carefully so my bare feet wouldn't slap the hardwood. The candle in the living room flickered, then steadied, and I realized with a sick lurch that the living room candlelight was enough for someone to see my silhouette if they were positioned just right. I moved into the kitchen's tighter space where cabinets boxed me in, and tried dialing 911. 1 bar, then none. The phone hung on, calling, like it was thinking about whether I deserved help. In the silence between thunderclaps, I heard a soft sound behind me in the kitchen, right near the pantry door, the faintest scuff as if a socked foot adjusted its stance. I whipped the flashlight beam there. Nothing, just pantry shelves, and darkness between boxes. But when I aimed the beam back at the counter, I saw something that made my stomach turn. The drawer where I keep spare batteries was open a few inches, and I know it had been closed. I didn't open it. I hadn't even walked near it. The drawer slid another fraction of an inch outward, slow enough that it almost looked like gravity, except drawers don't do that on level tracks, unless someone pulls. I couldn't move. I just watched the gap widen until it was big enough to look like a mouth. Then the flashlight beam jittered slightly because my hands were shaking, and in that tiny wobble of light, I saw the edge of something inside the drawer catch the beam. My spare flashlight batteries lined up neatly, and beside them a pale, fingerprint smear on the inside lip of the drawer, fresh enough to shine. The coal finally connected for one breath, and I heard a dispatcher's voice start to speak, and then the signal dropped like someone snapped a thread. No call, no comfort, just the drawer open, the candlelight bending, and the memory of fingers brushing mine, casual and intimate, like a reminder that I wasn't alone and never had been. I didn't run for the front door, because that would mean crossing the hallway. I didn't go to the bedroom because that meant turning my back. I did the only thing my panic offered. As a plan, I backed into the bathroom, locked the door and sat on the tile, with the flashlight aimed at the crack under the door, waiting for shoes to appear. Minutes passed. My breathing slowed. I started to wonder if fear had invented the touch, if I'd brushed my own knuckles on the counter edge, if my mind was collapsing under darkness. Then, under the door in the slice of shadow where the hallway should have been empty, I saw something move that wasn't light. A hand passed across the gap, slow and deliberate, palm down, fingers spread, as if someone was waving at me through the crack. The hand paused there for a beat, and then tapped once on the tile, directly in front of my door, a soft, wet sound like skin against stone. The vent above my bed used to be the most boring thing in my room, just a rectangle that pushed warm air in winter and cool air in summer. During the blackout, it became a mouth. The power went out around midnight, and the house fell into that heavy, unplugged silence where you can hear your own pulse. I lit one candle on my dresser and tried to sleep with my phone on low power, telling myself that the storm would pass and the grid would come back, and I would feel stupid in the morning for being tense. I almost drifted off when I heard the first whisper. It was so soft I thought it was wind sliding through the vents. Then it happened again, and this time it had a shape, cadence, like someone speaking quietly into a duct with their lips close to metal. I held still and listened. The whisper wasn't words yet, just breath and soft consonants, like a voice testing how far sound could travel. The candle flame leaned slightly toward the vent, reacting to a subtle movement of air, and my skin prickled because the airflow didn't feel like normal circulation. It felt like exhalation. I sat up slowly, keeping my eyes on the vent grill, and the whisper stopped immediately, as if it had heard my sheets shift. Silence returned, too perfect, too intentional. I waited, telling myself not to be ridiculous, telling myself ducts make noises, storms make pressure, changes your brain searches for patterns when it's afraid. Then, from the vent, my name came out in a whisper so close and clear that the hairs on my arms lifted. Not shouted, not distorted. Just my name, spoken the way someone says it when they're trying not to wake a house. I froze, with my mouth slightly open, not sure if I'd actually heard it or if my mind had supplied it like a cruel autocorrect. The whisper came again, and this time it didn't say my name. It said, "Don't move." The voice was calm, almost bored. And that calmness did something worse than any threat, because it implied control. I grabbed my phone and flipped the screen up for light, and the cold blue glow painted my face and hands. And in that glow I saw the vent grill shift slightly. Just a hair like pressure behind it changed. I stared so hard, my eyes watered. The grill shouldn't move. It screwed into the ceiling. The whisper continued, softer now, like it was amused by my light. "Turn it off," it said. "You're making it hard to hear." I tried to dial Davidstoid and asked. One bore. Da. Then nothing. The call failed before it could ring. The candle flame trembled and then steadied, and the whispering turned into something else. A slow, breathy sound, like someone breathing directly into the duct, filling it on purpose, pushing air through the grill so I could feel it on my face. It was faint, but it was there, a cool drift that didn't belong to the room's stillness. I slid out of bed and back toward the bedroom door, phone in one hand, candlelight flickering behind me. The vent whispered again, lower, almost affectionate. "Good," it said. "You're listening." I reached the door and turned the knob, and the door opened easily, which should have been relief, except relief doesn't feel like dread. The hallway outside was pitch black, and the air in it felt colder than the room, like the house had split into different climates. I stepped out and aimed my phone's weak glow down the hall. Nothing. Then, from the vent above my bed behind me, the whisper moved. It didn't get quieter as I left the room. It got closer, as if the voice was traveling through the ducts overhead, keeping pace with me. A soft murmur came from the ceiling vent in the hallway, now the same voice sliding through a different mouth. "There you are," it whispered. My stomach dropped, because it meant the voice wasn't stuck in my room. It was in the house. It was using the ventilation like a network, like a way to be everywhere without footsteps. I backed away from the hallway vent and nearly tripped over the runner rug. The candle in my bedroom flickered as if someone had passed beneath it, and I realized the airflow wasn't just sound. It was direction. It was guidance. I ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and pressed my ear to the vent inside that small room, hoping the metal would be silent there. For a few seconds it was. I almost started to believe I was safe. Then the whisper came through the bathroom vent, perfectly clear, like a person standing on the other side of the grill. "You can't lock air," it said, and the candle flame I'd carried in with me bent toward the vent as if something on the other side had just exhaled and smiled. I used to think vents were just boring rectangles in the ceiling that pushed air you barely noticed until the blackout made my whole building feel like one shared body, and the ductwork became the veins. The storm hit hard enough to rattle the window frames, and when the power went out, my apartment went quiet in a way that felt engineered, like someone had turned down the world on purpose. I lit 2 candles on the kitchen counter, kept the flame low, and sat on the living room floor with my phone in my hand watching the battery bleed. The hallway outside my unit was dead black. No elevator hum, no neighbor TV glow, no comforting signs that other people were awake. I told myself to stay still, to wait, to stop feeding the fear. Then I heard it, a whisper thin and papery, coming from the vent above my couch. At first it was just breath and soft consonants like someone murmuring into a sleeve. I held my own breath and listened harder. The whisper stopped immediately, as if it had heard my lungs freeze. That response made my skin prickle. Ducks don't react. The whisper returned a little clearer now, like the speaker had adjusted their mouth closer to the grill. I couldn't make out the words, but the cadence was wrong for wind. It had pauses that felt intentional, like someone waiting for me to lean in. I stood up slowly, candlelight trembling, and aimed my phone screen at the vent without turning on the flashlight. The blue glow was weak, but it was enough to show the grill screws and the thin layer of dust around it. Nothing moved. The whisper stopped again. Then from a different vent, farther down the room near the bedroom doorway, the same whisper picked up, as if it had relocated. My stomach dropped because that meant the sound wasn't trapped in one place. It was traveling through the ducts overhead, finding the nearest opening, keeping pace with me. I stepped toward the bedroom, and the whisper followed, sliding into the vent above the hallway like a voice walking without feet. The building was still black, but the ducts were alive with that faint sound, and I suddenly understood the shape of the threat. Someone could be inside the building's maintenance spaces, inside the crawl above the drop ceiling, using the vent openings, like peepholes, using the ductwork, like a phone line. I backed into my bedroom and closed the door, quietly, trying to make the room smaller, trying to create a boundary the voice couldn't cross. It didn't help. The whisper moved again, now coming from the vent directly above my bed, soft and close, like a mouth near my ear. This time it formed words. "Don't waste your light." My throat tightened so hard it hurt. The voice wasn't angry. It sounded calm, almost mildly amused, like it had been listening to me breathe for a while. I looked at my candle flames. They leaned slightly toward the vent, not flickering like a draft, but bending as if air was being pushed out in a controlled exhale. Then the voice said, my name. Not shouted, not distorted, just my name, spoken the way someone says it when they're close enough to touch you and don't need to raise their voice. I didn't answer. I backed away from the bed and felt for the bedroom window latch with my free hand, thinking maybe I could scream to the street, but the rain was loud and the street was dark. The whisper came again, softer, more intimate. "You locked your door," it said. "That's cute." I felt a cold wave spread across my shoulders, because it meant the voice knew exactly where I was and what I was doing, and it wasn't guessing. It was watching through sound, through airflow, through the little gaps you forget exist until someone uses them. I grabbed my keys and my pepper spray from the nightstand and moved toward the front door, deciding I would rather risk the black hallway than stay in a room where the ceiling talked. The whisper followed me out of the bedroom and into the living room, vent again as if it was overhead tracking. "Go on," it said. "Open it." The moment my hand touched the deadbolt, the whisper stopped, and the silence that replaced it felt like a smile. Then from the vent above the entryway, one last breathy sentence drifted down, quiet as dust. "We can hear you anywhere." The first candle went out, like it was pinched between invisible fingers. Not sputtering, not drowning in wax, not flickering into a natural death, just a sudden, clean extinguish that left the wick glowing red for a second in the dark. I stared at it frozen, because the air in the room felt still. No window open, no fan, no draft. The blackout had been going for an hour, storm still rolling, and I had arranged my candles the careful way, spaced out, away from curtains, away from anything that could catch. They were my little islands of control. When the first flame died, I told myself the wick must have been bad, maybe a cheap candle, maybe the storm pressure changed the airflow. Then the second candle went out. Same way. Clean. Immediate. The living room dropped 2 shades darker, and my pulse spiked, because now it wasn't a coincidence. I stood up holding my phone, like it could replace light, and I watched the remaining candle across the room, as if it was a witness. Its flame was steady, a small teardrop of gold that made the furniture look soft and harmless. I took one step toward it, and the flame bent sideways sharply like someone had walked past it fast enough to push air. I stopped. The flame steadied again. I didn't move, and it didn't move. That's when I noticed the smell, not smoke from the candles, but something faint and human in the darkness, warm and close, like damp fabric and skin. The remaining candle leaned again slower, this time as if the air in front of it was being displaced by something large and near. Then it went out. The room didn't just go dark, it went blind. For a second my eyes tried to adjust and found nothing to land on, and in that nothing, I heard a sound that made my stomach drop. A soft exhale directly in front of me, controlled and satisfied, like someone blowing out birthday candles. Without laughing, my phone screen lit as I fumbled for the flashlight, and in the cold blue glow, I saw smoke rising in thin streams from each wick. 3 pale ribbons twisting upward like signals. The smoke didn't drift randomly. It leaned toward the hallway as if pulled by movement, as if the air was being drawn that way. I turned my phone light toward the hall, and saw nothing but the long black corridor and the suggestion of door frames. The storm outside boomed, and under it from somewhere very close, a whisper came low and calm. "Now you're honest," it said. I backed toward the kitchen phone, held out, and my heel hit the edge of the rug. I stumbled, and the phone beam jerked across the walls, catching glimpses, the couch arm, the picture frames, the dark TV screen reflecting my own pale face. In that reflection behind me for half a second, I saw a shape that wasn't mine, something standing close enough that it should have been visible, shoulders and head, suggested by the absence of light. When my beam snapped back, the shape was gone, but the air where it had been felt colder, like a space someone had just occupied. I forced myself to keep moving to reach the kitchen, where the drawers held metal and weight, and as I moved I felt something brush my sleeve, light as a passing hand. My skin erupted in goosebumps. The whisper returned closer, now almost at my ear. "No wind," it said, like it was answering the thought I was too afraid to admit. I reached the kitchen counter and grabbed the long fireplace, lighter the one I used for candles, hands shaking so badly I could barely click it. The lighter sparked. A tiny flame jumped up. In that small, sudden light, I saw it clearly. A thin smear of moisture on the air itself near my shoulder, like breath, fogging in the dark. And beyond it, the faint outline of a smile suggested by nothing more than a gap in the smoke. The lighter flame died as I fumbled and the kitchen returned to blue foam glow. The whisper faded back toward the hallway vent, toward the darkness that had swallowed the candles, and the last thing it left me with was a soft please sentence that landed like a lock turning. "You don't need electricity," it said. "You just need to stop seeing." The neighborhood watch whistle was supposed to mean safety, the kind of old-fashioned signal you'd hear in a movie and roll your eyes at. But during the blackout, it became the sharpest sound in the world, because it cut through thunder, like a blade. I'd moved into the neighborhood 6 months earlier, and the watch captain retired, guy-friendly smile, flashlight, always clipped to his belt, had handed me a cheap plastic whistle and told me half-joking, "If you ever hear 3 short blasts, don't go outside. Turn off your lights and call it in." I remembered laughing. I remembered thinking, who's going to be whistling in 2025 when everyone has phones? Then the storm came. The grid went down and my phone became a useless slab of glass with one bar that flickered like a dying heartbeat. I was sitting in my living room with one candle tucked low behind a stack of books to hide the flame from the windows when the first whistle blast hit. Short, sharp. It came from outside, somewhere down the street. I froze instantly, candlelight trembling across the walls. 2 more blasts followed, evenly spaced, and my skin went cold because I knew the pattern. 3 short blasts. Not a bird. Not wind through a fence. A signal? I killed the candle with the lid of a jar, and the room dropped into deeper dark. The rain hammered the roof. Thunder rolled, but that whistle stayed in my ears as if it had carved itself there. I crept to the front window and peeked between blinds, careful not to move the slats too much. The street was black, except for lightning flashes that turned everything into stark photographs. Trees bending wet asphalt, the silhouettes of houses crouched in darkness. On the next flash, I saw 2 small points of light, moving flashlights, not streetlights, sweeping low across lawns, as if searching for something on the ground. Neighborhood watch, I told myself. That was the point. Then the whistle blew again, closer this time, and something about it felt wrong. The pitch was the same, but the timing was too perfect, too rehearsed, like a metronome. 3 short blasts. Pause. 3 short blasts. If it was the watch, why keep repeating? Why so close to my house? I backed away from the window and listened. Another sound joined the storm, a soft tapping on my porch, reeling like a hand checking wood. Then a faint clink, metal against metal near the front steps. My stomach tightened. I moved to the hallway, keeping my phone screen off, and gripped my flashlight with both hands. I didn't turn it on yet. I waited for another whistle. It came again, and this time it wasn't down the street. It was right outside my front door, so close I could feel it in my teeth. 3 short blasts, then a pause long enough for my brain to imagine a face inches from the peephole smiling. Then a voice muffled by the door, calm and authoritative. "Neighborhood watch? Open up. We're checking houses." Everything in that sentence was designed to make me move. The title, the plural, the routine. If I opened the door, I'd be doing what a decent neighbor does. I didn't move. The voice tried again, softer, like a coax. We heard a whistle. "We're making sure everyone's okay." My mouth went dry because I realized the lie inside the lie. He wasn't saying he blew it. He was saying he heard it as if someone else did it. As if he was responding. As if he was the helper. My phone finally caught a sliver of service, and I dialed 911 with shaking fingers, holding the device low to hide any glow. The call began to connect, then dropped. Outside the porch, boards creaked with slow, deliberate weight. Not the shifting of someone standing politely at a door, but the measured movement of someone repositioning, listening for what the house would do. Then the whistle blew again, but not 3 blasts this time. 1 long, steady blast that turned my spine to ice because it sounded like a warning to someone else. Immediately from farther down the side of my house, I heard a second whistle answer back shorter, like a reply. 2 people, coordinating, using the neighborhood watch code like a language. The voice at my door spoke again, and the friendliness was gone. "Don't be stupid," it said quietly. "We can hear you in there." I backed into my bedroom and locked the door, pressing my ear to the wood, listening. The porch went quiet for a moment, then I heard the faint scrape of something against my front door frame, like a tool sliding where the latch meets the strike plate. Then, from the living room window area, a soft tap, tap, tap against glass. Not frantic, almost playful. My phone finally connected on my second attempt, and I whispered my address so fast my words tripped over each other. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, stay hidden. Officers were coming. Outside, the whistle blew again, 3 short blasts, but this time it came from inside my house. Not outside the door. Not down the street. Inside, somewhere beyond my bedroom wall, as if someone stood in my hallway and put the whistle to their lips just to prove a point. I stared at my closed bedroom door, heart hammering, and realized the worst truth all at once. The whistle wasn't only a lure to get me outside. It was also a test to see who was home, who was awake, who would move. And now, someone was already past my locks, using the same signal that was supposed to protect us. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just listened to the storm, and to the soft, slow footsteps in my hallway that followed the whistle, unhurried, confident, like they knew exactly how long it would take for help to reach a dark street. The first rule of the Blackout Siege was simple: light is a confession. The second rule was worse: silence is an invitation. I learned both rules the night the power went out in my grandfather's house, the old 2-story place at the end of a long driveway with too many rooms and too many windows, the kind of house that feels warm and familiar in daylight and turns predatory in the dark. I was house-sitting while he was out of state, just me and a storm that had been threatening all day, swelling the sky until it finally broke. When the grid failed, it wasn't gradual. It snapped. Every lamp died at once. The furnace fan cut off. The house made a tiny settling sound like it had exhaled. Outside, thunder rolled low and heavy, and the wind shoved rain against the windows, hard enough to make them shiver. I told myself it was fine. I had my phone. I had flashlights. I had candles in the kitchen drawer. I had locks. Then I checked the front door out of habit, and found the deadbolt already unlocked. Not unlatched. Unlocked cleanly, as if someone had turned it from inside earlier and I hadn't noticed. I locked. It felt the bolt slide home, and a second later from somewhere outside near the side of the house I heard the crisp plastic click of the breaker box. One click, then another. The power was already out, but the sound wasn't about electricity. It was a message. I'm here and I know where the switches are. My phone showed 1 bar of service and a flood of weather alerts. I tried calling my grandfather. No connection. I tried Devichstuyadenast. It rang once, then dropped. The storm was eating the signal, or something else was. I moved through the house carefully, using the faint glow from my phone screen without turning on the flashlight yet, because I didn't want to paint myself in a window. The rooms were too big, the hallways too long, the darkness too complete. Every doorway looked like a mouth. I lit 1 candle in the kitchen, then immediately regretted it, because the flame turned the window above the sink into a bright rectangle that could silhouette me from the yard. I blew it out, and stood in the dark again, holding my breath, listening. The first sound that didn't belong was a soft scrape from upstairs, like the edge of a shoe against carpet, followed by a pause. I froze at the bottom of the staircase, and stared up into black. The staircase was a tunnel of shadow, with a landing I couldn't see. Another scrape. Closer to the top step, now, like someone adjusting their stance to look down at me, without stepping into view. Lightning flashed outside, and for half a heartbeat, the upper hallway lit in cold white, and in that flash, I saw a hand on the upstairs banister, fingers curled around wood, as if someone was leaning out of sight. The flash died, and the hand vanished. My body wanted to run to the front door. My brain reminded me the front door was 50 feet away, across a living room full of windows. Light from lightning would make me a moving target in a glass box. So I went the other direction, deeper into the house, because fear makes bad geometry feel like strategy. I slipped into the pantry, shut the door gently, and pressed my ear to the wood. Through it I heard the house shifting, not settling, not creaking, but responding. A soft footstep upstairs, then a second footstep downstairs, somewhere near the back hallway, as if more than one person was moving, and they were taking turns, when thunder covered them. The siege wasn't someone forcing their way in loudly. It was someone taking the house apart quietly, room by room, making the dark do the work. I stayed in the pantry until my lungs burned, then eased the door, opened a crack and peered out. The kitchen was black. The hallway beyond was black, but the air felt different, cooler, like a door somewhere had opened and let storm air bleed in. That's when I smelled it wet fabric, and something metallic faint but human, not the smell of rain through screens. I backed up and my heel bumped a can on the pantry shelf. Tiny sound, but in the blackout, tiny is loud. Immediately from the other side of the kitchen, something answered, a soft, deliberate knock on the counter, like a knuckle tapping wood, wants to say, I heard that. I didn't move. Another tap closer. Then right outside the pantry door, a whisper so close, it seemed to come through the wood grain itself. I know you're in there, the voice said, calm and patient, like it was stating a fact and not making a threat. My hands went cold. I held my phone with both palms and forced it to connect again, moving it toward the floor to avoid any glow from the screen. One bor. Non. One bor. The whisper returned softer. Don't waste it, it said. You'll need it later. The pantry door handle turned slowly, not yanked, just tested. The latch held. The handle returned to stillness. Then footsteps moved away, unhurried, like he had plenty of other doors to try. I waited until the silence stretched thin, then slipped out and moved through the kitchen, with my hands out, like a blind person, memorizing the counter edge, the doorway, the way the tile changed to hardwood. I wasn't trying to escape anymore. I was trying to survive a house that had become a maze. I headed for the den because it had one small window and a solid door. Halfway there, the smoke alarm chirped, once a low battery warning I'd never gotten around to fixing, and in that single chirp, I felt the entire house pivot. The footsteps upstairs stopped. The air held still. Then from the hallway ahead, a flashlight clicked on for half a second and swept across the wall a thin beam that found my shadow and then clicked off again. He wasn't using light to see the house. He was using light to see me. I slammed into the den, shut the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys. They clinked on hardwood. The sound made my stomach drop, because it was exactly the kind of sound the dark punishes. On the other side of the den door, the house stayed silent for 3 heartbeats. Then very gently something scraped along the door, slow and deliberate like metal dragging across paint. Not enough to break it, just enough to tell me the edge was sharp. I backed away until my calves hit the desk, and lifted the heaviest thing I could find, an old brass candlestick, because I needed weight in my hands more than I needed a plan. The scraping stopped. A new sound replaced it, a soft tapping on the den window, 3 taps in a row. The same rhythm as the neighborhood watch whistle but on glass. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. A signal right outside my hiding place. I stared at the black window and felt my throat close, because I knew what it meant he wasn't alone, and he was telling someone exactly where I was. Lightning flashed, and for that instant, the den window turned into a bright photograph, and in that photograph, I saw a face, inches from the glass, eyes wide, and calm mouth slightly open as if he was smiling or breathing. The flash died and the face vanished, but the fog of his breath stayed on the pane like a smear. From the hallway outside the den, a second voice spoke farther away, casual, almost bored. Found her, it said. The doorknob turned once, slow and smooth. The lock held. The knob turned again firmer, then stopped. Silence. Then the most terrifying sound of the entire night, the click of a key sliding into my den door lock from the outside. Not a lockpick, not force, a key that fit. My grandfather's house had too many spare keys, too many hiding places, too many ways someone could have gotten one long before the storm. The key turned halfway and paused as if whoever was holding it wanted me to hear the exact moment control changed hands. I lunged toward the door and threw my weight against it, bracing with my shoulder candlestick raised in a useless fist. The key turned again slower, and the lock mechanism surrendered with a soft internal clunk. The door didn't open yet. Whoever was out there waited, letting me imagine the swing, letting me picture the dark hallway flooding into the den like water. Then, right beside my ear, from the vent in the den ceiling, a whisper drifted down, intimate and calm. "Ready," it said, as if the house itself had spoken. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The door finally began to move inward by an inch, and in that inch of darkness I saw nothing. No hand, no shoe, just black air spilling into my room. Lightning flashed again, and in that brutal strobe I saw the silhouette of a man in the hallway, standing slightly to the side so the door would open without touching him. One hand on the knob, the other held low as if carrying something heavy. Behind him, farther down the hall, a second silhouette stood near the stairs, watching still as furniture. The flash died, and the silhouettes disappeared, but the door kept opening slowly, patient as a tide. That was when my phone in my pocket caught a single bar and buzzed. Not a call, not a message, just the brief vibration of a system notification, as if it wanted to remind me it was alive. I yanked it out, hit emergency, and pressed it hard to my cheek like prayer. The screen lit my hands blue. The call started to connect. Outside the den, the hallway went quiet, as if both men were listening for the ring, listening for proof that help was real. The line clicked, and a dispatcher's voice came through, faint and distant, like a voice from another world. 911. What's your emergency? I gave my address in one broken breath, and in the silence that followed my words, the man at the door chuckled softly. Then, almost politely, he closed the den door again until it was nearly shut, leaving only a narrow crack, so he could speak through it without stepping inside. "Tell them to hurry," he whispered through the gap. We turned off all the lights,